Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with chicken meatballs. That's right, we did the impossible. We made meatballs out of chicken that were tender, moist, and very flavorful, as in every bit as tasty as traditional meatballs. And if adding a few ounces of pork fat to accomplish that is cheating, then we definitely cheated. But as the wise man once said, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by prepping our chicken, which involves taking a pound of boneless, skinless chicken thighs and cutting them up in 1-inch pieces, half-inch pieces, 3/4-inch pieces. It doesn't really matter, since we're going to grind this up in a food processor anyway. But to make that easier, we do want to cut our chicken up into small pieces like this. And yes, you can definitely do this with chicken breast also, but the chicken thigh definitely have more fat and flavor. But either way, we'll go ahead and cut that up as shown. And then what we'll do is transfer that back to the plate. And then to our cut up chicken thighs, we're going to add 3 ounces of some kind of pork fat, which we definitely also want to cut up nice and small. And what I did is open up a package of bacon, and I cut 3 ounces off the fatty end, and then cut it up nice and small. And I love the extra flavor and little bit of smokiness the bacon brings. But if you want, you can just use plain pork fat, which is easy to get if you go to any butcher counter and tell them you need 3 ounces of pork fat off the belly or the pork shoulder, and they will be more than happy to give you exactly that. Okay, so that's going to be your choice. I mean, you are, after all, the big chicken of fat picking. And yes, that was an IPA beer reference. And what we'll do is distribute that very evenly over the top, and then we'll use our tongs to spread everything out as uniformly as we can. At which point we're going to transfer this into the freezer for 15 minutes so that it's nice and firm and very, very cold when we go ahead and process it. And do not skip this step. This is kind of key. And while that's in the freezer, we can pull the rest of our ingredients together, including 3 ounces of fresh breadcrumbs, or should I say bread crumbles, since what we'll do is cut the crust off some French bread, and then we'll crumble up the inside nice and small. And it's fine if the bread is fresh, and it's fine if the bread is a day old. But for this recipe at least, we want to avoid really dry breadcrumbs, which will absorb moisture, whereas our fresh breadcrumbs will actually add moisture. And once those are prepped, we can go ahead and grab our food processor and toss those in, followed by the rest of the ingredients. And we don't have to add some diced onions to this, but if we do, and I like them, I think we should give them a little sauteing first, or just soften them up in some olive oil. And while you could add raw, the cooking time for these meatballs is only 20 minutes, which is why I think we want our onions softened first. And then we'll also add a generous amount of freshly minced or crushed garlic, as well as a nice big pinch of red chili flakes, which means we don't need any cayenne, but you could add some if you want. But we will add some freshly ground black pepper, and then one of the secret ingredients, a 1/4 teaspoon of crushed fennel seed, which you can just crush on a cutting board with the flat of a knife. And that's going to add a little something something to these meatballs, which makes them taste even meatier. And then we will finish up the seasoning with the very obvious inclusion of some kosher salt, followed by some freshly chopped Italian parsley, and then last but not least, a tablespoon of white wine. And if you don't have any of that around, you can substitute with a teaspoon of white wine vinegar, diluted with 2 teaspoons of water. And for the purpose of these balls, that'll get you very close. And that's it at this point, assuming it's been in the freezer about 15 minutes. We can go ahead and transfer in our meats. And while I do that, I should mention, if you want to add a beaten egg to this, go ahead. Alright, the original recipe did call for that, but one time I forgot it, and I thought they tasted the same, but the texture might have even been a little better. So now I don't add it. But it is traditional, so if you want it, throw it in. And that's it. Once our partially frozen chicken and fat is in, we will start processing this using the old pulse spin, where we give the mixture 3 quick pulses, followed by a second or two leaving it on so it spins, and then we repeat, pulse spin, pulse spin, and we keep doing that until the mixture comes together into a ball of what looks like ground meat. And of course, it's never a bad idea to stop once in a while and scrape down the sides with a spatula, just to make sure everything's grinding evenly, which it appears to be. So I pop the top back on, and I pulse a few more times, and then I just left it on for a few seconds until the entire mixture comes together, like I said, into a ball of what looks like ground meat. But very important, once it does come together and ball up like this, We're going to want to stop because we don't want this to become a fine paste. Right? We don't want it super chunky, but it still should be kind of coarse. And you're going to get a great look at that when I transfer it into a bowl. Okay, so according to me at least, that's exactly what it should look like. And at this point, if we had to, we could start forming our meatballs. But the colder this mixture is, the easier it is to work with, and the better texture your meatball will have. So what I like to do is cover this with plastic and pop it in the fridge for about an hour, or of course longer if you want. And then once chilled, we will pull it out, and we will divide this into 12 equal portions, either by eye or by weighing it on a scale. And if you're wondering if that foil's been lightly greased with olive oil, it has been. And if you're keeping score at home, if you do 12, these are basically going to be 2-ounce meatballs, which I think is a very nicely sized meatball. And that's it. Once that's been accomplished, we can go ahead and grab some cold water, and we can wet our hands. Because as everybody knows, damp hands make smooth balls. And if you put a little bit of water on your hands, and then you roll your meatball like this, you're going to get a beautifully round and uniform and very smooth ball. So we will go ahead and do that to all 12. And that's it. Once our meat's been balled, we can move into final production, which means we're going to roast these in the center of a 425-degree oven for about 18 minutes, plus if we want, a couple minutes under the broiler after that to get a little extra browning. And if everything goes according to plan, they should look a little something like this. And besides the fairly attractive appearance, these things smell absolutely incredible. And because we use that little bit of olive oil, these should come off nice and clean. And as you can see here, we got some beautiful browning on the bottom. And if we wanted, we could just start eating these. Right, they're fully cooked and ready to enjoy. But I'm actually going to transfer these into some simmering tomato sauce for one final optional step, which is really not necessary to cook the meat any longer. So what I'm really doing is flavoring the sauce with the meatball. Since we're probably going to serve these on something like pasta or polenta, or who knows, maybe like a meatball sub. But anyway, the point is these are cooked, and you can eat them however or whenever you want. But like I said, I do like to let mine simmer for about 15 or 20 minutes in whatever sauce I'm going to serve them with. So that's what I did, at which point I fished one out so we can take a look at what we have. And before grabbing a fork and digging in, I went ahead and grated over some Parmesan cheese, the real stuff, Parmigiano Reggiano. And then I finished up with a pinch of finely chopped Italian parsley. And my chicken meatball was ready to enjoy. And that, my friends, believe it or not, was better than 90% of the meatballs I've ever had in my life, no matter what they were made out of. Okay, and first we'll talk about the texture, which was perfectly tender without being too soft and mushy. Which, not to brag, but that's not typical of your average chicken meatball. In my experience, they tend to be kind of dry and rubbery. Or even worse, they're very soft and mushy. But these were not. They were right in that sweet spot. And then as far as the flavor goes, the combination of that chicken thigh with that little bit of pork fat we added created a flavor extremely similar to a meatball using the traditional pork, veal, and beef. And yes, it's very subtle, but you can definitely taste a little bit of that smoky bacon in the background. So like I said, if you're not into that, just use regular plain pork fat instead. But having said that, I really do enjoy the bacon element, so that is my preferred fat of choice. And of course, if eating these plain on a plate isn't your thing, you can go ahead and serve those up on the pasta of your choice, or with some nice soft cheesy polenta, or stuffed in the always magical meatball sub. And pardon the possible cliche, but if you handed a plate of these to somebody, I really don't think your average meatball eater would be able to tell these are chicken. Oh, and let me give credit where credit's due. This recipe was adapted from one in the A16 cookbook. So thank you to Chef Nate for helping me produce what many think is impossible, a super flavorful, extremely meaty meatball made mostly from chicken. But anyway, that's it. My take on A16's take on chicken meatballs. Whether you're doing these to save a few dollars, using chicken instead of beef, or you're just looking for a little change of pace, like I said, which exact meat notwithstanding, these really were some of the best meatballs I've ever made, which is why I really do hope you give these a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.